The conception, operation, conclusion of the Lexington class aircraft carriers. Now, please note, before we start, and I'm going to place links to them through this video in cards up above me at some points. I've done videos on the Lexington class of battlecruisers and their conception in terms of key ships series 2. I think I've done, I think it was key ship series 3 that I did Lexington class aircraft carriers. And I've done other videos involving them. So these are vessels which I have done a lot of videos about the facts and the hard stuff on. The lengths, widths, beams, those sort of things. And so I'm going to say there are links to those videos here if you want to go hear them. This video, although it is going to have some of those stats in, is going to be far more about the conception, operation, conclusion. What they were conceived as versus what they were operated as, and how that evolved over time, and how we should judge them perhaps looking back, and how I judge them, and you can judge them how you feel on that information. So what I'm saying is, this is a video, yes, and it's probably going to end up being about an hour and 20 minutes, because most of my videos do end up about that length. And it has got about 10 slides. So, you know. These things have a habit of happening. But it's one video and there are several others. So if you want to know more, if you come out of this video going, he hasn't answered that question, or that bit wasn't included, I wonder why it wasn't. It's possibly because it was in another video. If it comes out, you watch all the videos, and I still haven't answered your question, please come along to Brew Ships on a Sunday, or just write the comment down below, and maybe I'll pick it up in Scuttlebutt when I do that once a month, which is basically my monthly roundup of interesting questions which I need to answer from the comments. Also, there's been, of course, some key ship comment response videos as well, which I probably have answered some of the questions in as well. So, they've had a lot of videos. And it's important to realise the Lexington class start off as battle cruisers. And they start off as that, and they are turned into carriers by treaty. They are turned into carriers by treaty. So they start off being constructed for one conception of operations, because the US Navy has one concept of how its fleet is going to work and how its operations are going to be in the event of a Pacific War. And please note, again, it's very much a Pacific War. I love the Lexington class battlecruisers, but as you'll see when we get to them, no one ever thought those things were designed to go and track down what the Royal Navy was building in terms of battlecruisers at this time. The generation after them, who knows where they could have gone, and I will open the floor up to discussions of that as well in this video. Please do discuss what you think the US Navy might have built after the Lexington class. Because I do not see the 16-inch ships, the generation of 16-inch ships, as the endpoint of the US Navy's growth at that point. I think their numbers they're producing might calm down after that. I think they probably would have calmed down in a post-World War I scenario. But as I talked about in many videos recently, I see, without the treaties, I see it being calming down in terms of quantity procurement, but I see there being a qualitative race continuing on, as there have been a qualitative race already, the US Navy being part of, along with the IJN, the Royal Navy, the Regia Marina, and, well, yeah, the French are not going to be in it anymore. They might be forced to be in it because of reacting to Regia Marina, but they don't want to be in it, and the Austro-Hungarians aren't going to be in it anymore at this point. But, you know, other powers might get involved. To the extent there's a sort of sub-race going on in South America, which also affects some of the American decision-making. And I could see that carrying on in the 20s and 30s in a qualitative race style. Because no one really wants to get into a quantitative race. They don't need to. It doesn't suit them. They have the relationships which it's best, especially between Britain and America, which can be best, the only two who could get into a qualitative race with each other, which can best be categorized as the people who work together, who are quite good colleagues when they want to be, quite annoying colleagues when they want to be, but they're the types who, oh, have you seen my new car? And then Next month, oh, have you seen my new cart? It's more one-upmanship rather than threat of, I've got a better battleship than you. I'm gonna crush you. It's, I've got a better battleship than you. You know, there's a difference in tonality going on in that relationship. And so, the Lexington class are where they started with the battlecruisers. I'm not sure if they're where the Americans would have ended with them. I don't think they would have. But their concept of operations, that lasts. That lasts beyond them. That lasts into the aircraft carriers that are built from them. And that's an interesting point of discussion, really, because the Lexington class, therefore, start out with a concept that's defining them, which was originally defined around a battlecruiser fulfilling that role, not an aircraft carrier. And that explains a lot of the decisions made in the process of their procurement. Some of those decisions there will be a long discussion of. 8-inch guns on above flight deck level, for starters. Because, yeah. Why? But anyway, this is the year of the aircraft carrier, conception, operation, conclusion of the Lexington class. And this is the shameless book plug, which I do in every single video, because I like to say thank you to everyone who likes, shares, and subscribes to videos, because that really does help the channel grow, and I like to spread the love of naval history. I love to spread it. It's something I exist to spread. Love of naval history. That's my purpose. And I do the shameless book plug because, as I've said in every video, and I will keep saying, I'm an academic. I like to teach universities. Teaching universities requires, in many ways in the UK, you be well published. And no one advertises your books, so, apart from you. When I have some new books coming out, hopefully later this year, then I'll have more up here and I'll have more covers. And it'll be not just for Troubles, Battles and Darings, which is on its second edition. Paperback version's out. It's a really good book on destroyers. Really good book. And more to come. The books to come are on the U-class submarines from the Royal Navy and the Flower-class corvettes. And then I've got a couple of books coming on, well, Jellicoe as Third Sea Lord and... well, I'm still deciding which of the directors of naval construction to start off with. But I think starting off with Jellicoe as Third Sea Lord will start that series off quite nicely. That's my idea. I think that'd be a good series to start off with. Because my plan is to have... basically take the idea behind key ships and turn it to a series of 45,000 word books, which will either be print-to-order books you can buy from Amazon, or Kindle books you can download from Amazon or other e-book sources. And also do a series of 45,000 word books on directors of naval construction and all of them and all the Third Sea Lords in that sort of time period that really sort of played that role. Because the Third Sea Lords that played a role of actually being involved designing the ships, etc., that's something which really comes along at the same time as directors of naval construction really do evolve. And so you can go through them as a nice sort of history, I think, to really show development of things. And who knows? Longer term, I have an entire book for the interwar years plan, but we'll leave that to one side. Ships which weren't constructed. So let's consider the battlecruiser concept for the Lexington class. It's all about information warfare. Now, I realise today there is a term of information warfare which all covers things like social media and information through the media, etc. And that is very true and probably in its most publicly visible modern form. But information warfare has been around a lot longer than that. Reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, dissemination of information, choosing how you portray yourself to others, have been forms of information warfare which have been around for a long time. Yes, the methodologies of how we portray ourselves and events to others might have changed. It used to be you showed up in a big, powerful, mean-looking ship and went, "Look at me, look how powerful I am." Didn't matter that the ship had barely any armor or anything. No, it was big and powerful looking. That was the important thing. That's literally the battle cruiser in deterrence operations. You're turning up and you're one of the biggest, meanest looking things there, going, aren't I good looking? Aren't I elegant? Look how powerful I am. I can turn up here, I can turn up there. One of the interesting things that came up when I started discussing the Lexington class as battle cruisers, and I did a video about them, so one of the questions came along sort of, oh, what would the British respond by? Would the British be following them round? And no. The British would never be following them round. There was this idea that, you know, the Lexington would do a port visit and the British would send a Russian battlecruiser to do a port visit behind them. They wouldn't. If it's a port they visited regularly, they would probably just carry on as they normally did. If it's a port they didn't visit regularly but felt it was important, they made a statement. They'd rush whatever was biggest, closest to get there before the Lexington class arrived, because they didn't want to be following it. They wanted to be setting the tone, not following the tone. And they really wanted to cause trouble, then what they'd do is they'd make something visit another port nearby afterwards. It'll be a visit to another big port, and it would be a case of, oh well, you had the Americans come visit you, so you don't need us to come visit you. The ultimate power move. You don't visit them, you visit someone else, their rival. Yeah, that's how you do naval diplomacy. Still, it's how you do naval diplomacy. It's one of the things certain nations have found annoying. For example, they let Russian ships come in and do refueling in recent times, and then other nations chose not to do their refueling in their ports and went to other ports instead. And it was, well, why aren't you coming to us? We're offering a good deal. Yes, but you have them, so we don't go. It's what happens. Information warfare is not about... Today, too often these days, we focus information warfare literally on social media. And that is a big section of it, because it's probably the most public-facing section of it, in how you shape the information and shape the impression of the battlefield, of the conflict, of what's going on. But it's not the beginning of it, and it's not the end of it. There is a whole thing around it, and this is a growing section of information warfare, but the Lexington class were a big part of the US Navy's approach to that in the beginning. The reason they are built as they are, battle cruiser 2 words, not battle cruiser 1 words, is because they are supposed to be about speed, about economic warfare if they're fighting, and about reconnaissance. They are about appearing places where they needed to be to show the US Navy's presence. They are about finding the enemy fleet and keeping away from them so they can get the information back to the battle fleet, so the big, heavy hammer blow of the battle fleet can come and smash them. That's it. These ships have to be considered something on the par, of the equivalence to... Okay, so here's the thing. When you wield a sledgehammer, and I've been doing a lot of this lately, meet 4-5, my sledgehammer. This is your battle fleet. This is what's going to do the crushing. And your power in your hold. Use one hand for guidance and one hand for strength, to make sure you're lining up. Well, the strength behind your battle fleet is your logistics line. But the guidance, this one, that's your reconnaissance. That is your battle cruiser force. And that is what the Lexingtons are for. They're about guiding the battle fleet. They're about making sure it hits the right target, and hits it at the time you want to hit them, not when they choose to hit them. So that in mind, what guided them? What was creating them, and how does this mission profile continue? Well, these are very long-range vessels. These are very high cruising speed, high capability vessels. Truly are. It's from this mission profile you get a 10,000 nautical miles at 10 knots official range, official speed, and also where you get the aim for 33 knots of speed, but actually they, in carrier form, can do 34.5 knots officially. And I'm going to keep emphasizing this. It's the official speed. And realistically, the transfer of this doctrine, which the US Navy was developing, of what their battlecruisers were going to do, is the cornerstones of the scouting force. Which was this force which was supposed to go out and be almost the president's mission in the prior to wartime. And with that mission to hopefully shape the conflict and shape what the conflict was going to be. To find the enemy, to spot them, to track them. To enable the battle fleet to really hone in on its targets. But also to prevent or encourage, depending on perspective, others to maybe not go involved in the conflict, or if they do get involved in conflict, get involved in the conflict on the right side as far as the Americans were concerned. And realistically, the thing that shapes the transition most in terms of working out how a carrier is going to fit that role, and that is what the US Navy are originally asking for when they're building Lexington class. Please note, I know what the Lexington class become, but this is what they're talking about when they're shaping and designing them. It's the work of Admiral William Sims, who is running endless war games at the Naval War College. He is literally being sent back there after World War I. He isn't going to get more promotions because, frankly, he is... Some would say he's too plainly spoken with the politicians. Others would say he's too politically active. Still more would say he calls a spade and really doesn't like people trying to cut his service. Either way, he manages to basically rule himself out of contention of promotion. Sadly enough for the US Navy. But in good news, that means he spends a lot of time in a war college, basically designing the future US Navy, designing the methods which are going to train the officer class which are coming through, and setting up the program which is going to guide the creation of the future US Navy. And by wargaming it, he's setting out a lot of the tenets and plans that they are going through. And I've done a whole video on US Naval Aviation Doctrine, how that came about, and talked about him there. So that should be another video above me. I think there is a limit to how many videos I can put above me in this video. We're probably going to see if we can reach that number today. Whatever it is, we're going to see. Oh. But no. Admiral Sims is really cool. And he really does develop a lot of the key points of US naval doctrine in the interwar years, and how he evolves it. One of the key things he evolves is the scouting force. He evolves it from being a battlecruiser-centric force that was going to use them as the linchpin of strategy, to working out how it would carry out its mission with battleships at its core, because the US Navy didn't have any battlecruisers, to working out how the new concept of an aircraft carrier might be adapted to the role. And he did that all via the medium of wargaming. And it was from that you get this, where they basically take the hull and power plant of a Lexington-class battlecruiser, and thanks to some trunking, some very interesting calculations of construction, claim they turn it into a 37,000 tons in standard aircraft carrier. This is the trouble for the US Navy, please note. When they start trying to hold others to account in the treaty system, everyone just looks at Lexington class and goes, and yes, those are 37,000 tons exactly. We believe you. They should have probably lied more and gone, no, they're 36,000 tons. Prove it, disprove it. At that level, you're going to have real trouble trying to work out the 1,000 or so tons. And that sounds slightly like they're being more honest. So 36,500 tons or something like that. Gone, yeah, we got them under the 37,000 ton limit. But no, by saying it's 37,000 tons exactly, which is the exact maximum limit you can work to once you've added in all the add-ins you can get, you have kind of your pooch. You truly have. So, these have been a new core for the scouting force. And aviation was going to be the cornerstone of it. Reconnaissance by aircraft, air power, but also strike by air power. Taking out enemy aircraft carriers so that they couldn't play in the battle. Providing a raiding force. There are all sorts of things which have been planned for the battlecruisers. Battlecruisers hadn't been planned to take out... Lexington had not been about taking out enemy battlecruisers. They really hadn't been. They are not designed for that. Yes, they have 16-inch guns, but Lord help them with their armor. And Lord help them with their subdivision. They are, as said, battle cruisers. They are the 1920s version of the Invincible class. They are fast, they are cool, they are great for hunting. They can beat up cruisers if they get near them. They can do all the reconnaissance missions, all the economic warfare missions. They will literally be your presence anywhere you want them on. I wouldn't be surprised if they could have done a lot more than the 33 knots, which they were planned officially as going to be able to do. And that's a good thing. That's a capable asset. But honestly, as aircraft carriers, they make a lot more sense. They have a lot more capabilities. And as these things, they are fundamentally scary. As long as you use them right. The thing is, originally, and one of the reasons I think they have the 8-inch guns they have, is because the idea was to use them rather like the battle cruisers, as the tip of the spear for the scouting force. When in reality, what you want them to be is actually well back. I.e., have the cruisers out of the front, the aircraft out beyond them, and have the carrier behind the cruisers with an escort. At least a flotilla of destroyers and some cruisers herself. That's what you sort of be talking about, but it takes a while to transition to that. They start off with working out if the carrier can fulfill the battlecruiser role. Then they work out how to make the carrier fulfill the battlecruiser role before working out actually how can a carrier better perform this role. But first off, you have to define the carrier and define the carrier in the role, and that's where all the wargaming comes in, and that's where Lexington class really do grow. Now, one of the really interesting things in their construction is the humongous fights that are over their superstructure and design, and whether or not the funnel should be a trunked system which sort of sends the exhaust gases out the stern. There's all sorts of fun debates. Many of them are shot down quite early on. They then return with Ranger with a vengeance and get shot down hard in that case as well, but they are there. And this is what leads us to these sort of vitals. As you can see, the 37,000 tons exactly in standard. Honestly, Gov, they are 37,000 tons exactly in standard. And, again, the problem with the 8-inch guns, they're put there, and as I say, my thinking is that it's a legacy of them going to be the tip of the spear like the battlecruisers were supposed to be. And that they were supposed, and they was all worried they might find themselves without cruiser support and in a surface engagement. Three things with that. One, they are a sodding great unarmoured target if they're in a cruiser engagement. They've got between 5 inches and 7 inches of armour. They are a nearly 40,000 ton, well, going to be a more than 40,000 ton target. They don't want to be in an 8-inch gun battle with anyone, especially not when those 8-inch guns could be having to fire over their own flight deck, which stops them launching the most lethal weapon systems they have, their own aircraft. You can't operate aircraft from that flight deck while firing the 8-inch guns. You can't. I know there are discussions of people going, well, you know, if the guns are firing away from the deck and firing off to the starboard, yeah, you could do it. There are casings, there are all sorts of things going all over the place. You do not want to do that. That's a good way to lose aircraft, and a good way to lose pilots, and a good way to end up with an accident on your flight deck. And that's before we deal with the shockwave issues. So don't do it. The US Navy certainly didn't want to. And it's also why, for most navies, when they're putting guns on their large guns on their carriers, and even the US Navy with the Yorktowns, etc., and forward, the guns, they're stuck below flight deck level. They might be on the deck, literally below flight deck level, but they are down below flight deck level, so that anything that causes an issue goes away from the flight deck. That's the aim. But also, when you think about those things, the gun turrets have their own armor. The gun turrets have their own armored barbettes, their own protection for the ammunition hoist, etc. All that is a lot of top weight that you have to balance and organize out in the hull. So, honestly, you don't have those there. You have thousands of tons you can probably play with. If you want to pretend to be 37,000 tons standard, you could have got away with all sorts of extra things if you not had those guns. You literally would have so much extra tonnage to play with. But decent air group, decent aircraft facilities, a catapult, and a couple of elevators. It's what they needed. It's what would help them work. Later on, you'll probably get some argument case of, well, would it have been better to have deck edge elevators? Probably would have been, but at this point, they were still being hotly contested. And the US Navy won't stick them in till WASP. WASP gets the first deck edge elevators. Deck edge lifts. So they're a long way away in design evolution times. But I will say this. One of the reasons why they do keep to certain vitals very similar to the battlecruisers is because of Panama. The Panama Canal. The US Navy is always limited by that requirement. They have to go through the Panama Canal and come back out. That affects them far more than other navies. For other navies, if they can go through the Panama Canal, that's great. If they can't, we can live with it. For the US Navy, having to be a two-ocean fleet without the resources required of a two-ocean fleet, and let's be honest, they were being required to be a two-ocean fleet a long time before there was a two-ocean Navy Act, etc. That meant the Panama Canal's restrictions were basically the US Navy's restrictions. How big you can be to go in a lock, how big you can be to fit through that canal, that is going to be your guiding criteria. That is going to be your limitations. And you're going to have to live with that. Every single time. Panamax, as we often call it, is the consistent limitation on the US Navy's construction. Britain had Suez, which was not quite the same restriction, but it could have issues with draft, unless it was being dredged regularly, and that did worry them. And there were sort of times when they would send some ships through light. So what they do is they'd offload their fuel in Alexandria, and then when they got to the other side, they'd refuel. It didn't matter to the Royal Navy, they had ships going both ways. They had lots of ships operating, they had lots of fuel. It didn't bother them one jot to do that. But that was often a criteria for Suez. Okay, is this ship fine to go straight through Suez, or is this a ship which is, we have to lose some fuel? Okay, fuel off, then we go through. For the US Navy, there are locks. So, they come into service, and the first thing the US Navy tries to do is tries to make them fit the role of a battlecruiser. And finds out very quickly, hang on, Sims was right in his later works. They aren't going to fit a battlecruiser properly role, they're going to do something else. Let's start playing around with this. And that's where a lot of the fleet problem ideas start to come from. A lot of the fleet problem doctrines and testing starts to come from those things which Sims did. And as I've said earlier this year at several points, next year is the year of leadership. And going into some of the stuff Sims did is something I'm looking forward to doing next year. It's going to be a fun video, and if I'm very lucky, I'll get my friend BJ Armstrong on the channel to have a chat about Sims. I might see if I can do that before this year. We'll see. Now Langley, which believe it or not you can see the stern of here, had really set the tone for carriers becoming an outside problem in the fleet problems. And honestly, her performance is what, with the evidence from the wargaming, persuaded the US Navy's Bureau of Ships to actually... And I can't believe I'm saying this for the Bureau of Ships at this period, become somewhere approaching efficient, and the Bureau of Aeronautics to become something approaching cooperative, and for the two of them together to actually produce the ships quite quickly. They weren't to budget or to the actual projected time or in any way, shape or form as was originally intended. But they were actually produced, okay? And they actually came into service far quicker than they could have been, considering what was going on. So you have to give an incredibly small amount of credit where credit is due, okay? It's an incredibly small amount of credit. Actually, probably closer to that. A really, really small amount of credit where credit is due. The first things first, you always have to remember them, is that a large amount of money, despite this wonderful model collection built here, there is a truly humongous amount of money spent. Well, we're going to build them one way, and oh, frigate, that doesn't work. Let's build them another way. And there's a lot of people, and I won't name names. I won't name names at all, who could have said a lot of "I told you so's" in this process, and possibly did. But anyway, they come into service in time for Fleet Problem 9. And in Fleet Problem 9, they put the submarines and Lexington combined with what was the scouting forces against the battle fleet. And, well, they do well. In fact, in Fleet Problem 9, the US Navy deployed 72% of its battleship strength, which sounds like a lot of numbers, but in terms of working battleships, that's a fairly decent number. It's 1929, you know? That's over a dozen ships. And 68% of their destroyer strength, pretty much every destroyer they had that was actually working, and 52% of their modern combat aircraft, which is a lot for the US Navy to deploy. It's pretty much putting all their assets. So they are truly trying to take the problems away from the wargaming and put as much assets as they can into actually fighting a battle. Without fighting a battle, of course. Now, this operation included such things, well, this fleet problem included such things as, well, they're trying to defend the Panama Canal. And at this point, Saratoga, with only a single cruiser, does a sweep to the south, attacks the canal successfully. Lexington's part of the defense force. And she gets sunk 3 times later in the day. Always helpful. But she kind of proved the versatility of her by actually managing to get in to carry out the strike. 1930, they moved the exercise, that's Fleet Problem 10, to Caribbean waters. And this time, Saratoga and Langley get disabled by Lexington, which does a quick surprise attack. And then, for some reason, the side which Lexington is on manages to dominate the battle, because they have all the information about where the enemy is. Fleet Problem 11 is also held in the Caribbean, and is similarly interesting. Fleet Problem 12, that's in the waters of Central America and Panama. And basically the plan was to try and land forces, establish bases, and attack Panama Canal overground, while Blue defended with their heavy aviation fleet. So Blue is based on Saratoga and Lexington. And, well, they attacked the invasion fleets quite heavily. They failed to stop the landing stow, and they were felt to get too close to the Black Fleets for their own survival. Fleet Problem 13, well, that's slightly more of a worrying if you're the Americans, because... how do I put this politely? The carriers prove they can attack wherever they want. They truly do. Basically, Fleet Problem 13 turns into a who can kill whose carrier first. And it also turned into a scenario of proving the importance of the carriers to the information, strike capability, air defense, to your ability to find and fix the enemy. Yes, still the most powerful heavy weapons you had were your battleships. But your carrier was fast coming up to that level, and it was a 6 of one and half a dozen of the other in terms of their value range. And then it just goes on and gets worse. It gets worse. They start doing more and more attacks on Hawaii, on various other bases, and showing that they can get through. They start showing the range and strength of carriers. And what you have to remember is that as more and more carriers get involved, and more carriers do get involved, these things only grow. Eventually you get Ranger involved. In 1940, when you had Fleet Problem 21, you didn't have your Ranger around there, but you did have pretty much every other ship that the US Navy could get there. And, you know, they had 60 warships over in the neutrality patrols, but pretty much everything else they could get was sent to take part in Fleet Problem 21. The trouble is, after that battle, after that Fleet Problem 21, that's when President orders that the United States fleet stays in Hawaii. Admiral James Richardson, the Commander-in-Chief, US Fleet, opposes it. He says Hawaii is not ready to base them, it's not secure enough. It hasn't got the defenses they need, and they've already proved several times that carriers can strike it and hurt it. In multiple fleet problems, combined problems, exercises with the army, all sorts of things, they have proved every single time they can hit and cause severe damage with carriers. And yet, May the 7th, 1940, that's where they decide to hold them and to keep them. 1941... well, the Fleet Problem 22 was cancelled. And that's why, if you consider it the most recent Fleet Problem, was the Fleet Problem 23, which has been done in, I think it was in 2012 with the Carl Vinson. I think it was 2012. The US Navy has done Fleet Problems 24 to 28 over more recent years. But it's something which honestly I would like to see these sort of large-scale exercises I'd like to see more of. I think they're a very good way of training forces and a very good way of working into problems. And I think one of the scenarios which I think you might want to be included is to set up problems more like this with less set-piece exercises and have more allies involved. And tell them to experiment and go for it. And if you don't want to reveal the results, I award bragging rights as the reason for winning, because as we all know, most most naval personnel will absolutely do anything for the bragging rights of winning. Then you have to make the prize tangible in other ways, i.e. the crews of the winning side get an award of some kind, or get leave, or get a party thrown for them, or something. There are many things you can do discreetly. An Amazon voucher. That's probably less discreet, but because you suddenly have thousands of naval personnel going on Amazon and ordering whatever. But, you know, there's got to be something you can do to reward them. Because one of the things with the fleet problems in this period is because of the way the press covered them, because of the way the press and the media did cover them, there was pride. There was tangible bragging rights in victory, which was useful. And because of the way the rest of the Navy went on about it, there was tangible bragging rights in victory and being part of the winning side, which incentivizes it. The crews play that much harder, are that much more realistic, when there's not just someone rounding up at the end going, and by points we are going to award the victory to the black team rather than the blue team. That doesn't really involve them. Where you go, the black team have won, not over the blue team, so black team, you have got half the leave days for the blue team. That would cause immediate resignations. But, you know, you can't go that far, but you need to do something, okay? Something. And so this leads them into their war service, and thankfully at this point, some point in this period, someone finally has a revelation and goes, you know what? Those 8-inch guns, yes, they're not sensible. They're just not sensible. And when I say someone finally has this revelation, Lexington's turrets are removed in March 1942. This is Saratoga. Saratoga loses her 8-inch guns and gets her 5-inch guns in January 1942, while she's receiving repairs. A little bit late, but thankfully Lexington and Saratoga are there, and they are going to be useful ships, and they are very useful ships in wartime. Now, the raiding they carried out at the start of the war has been covered in this video up here, which is all about the American carrier raids at the beginning of World War II. I do love being able to do this, but at a certain point I could max this out. I think I'm up to about 4? I wonder if it goes any higher, how many I can get in. Anyway. Now, Lexington had, of course, she had quite a lot of 5-inch guns, but she had her 8-inch guns replaced by 20mm guns. And Lexington, once you discount the war service, which is about raids, well, she goes out at Coral Sea. And at Coral Sea, she takes a lot of hits. She really does. After all, the Battle of Coral Sea, it was Lexington's aircraft which spotted the Shoho. And Lexington's aircraft which did most of the damage to the Shoho, which allowed Yorktown's aircraft to finish her off. And Lexington is important also for the defense. It's her radar and her fighters which do the lion's share of protecting Lexington and Yorktown when the Japanese try and attack them later on. They do a fairly good job of it too. On the 8th of May, though, the next day, both sides spot each other about the same time. That's not a good scenario. And they start launching aircraft roughly at 0900 hours. 18 Zeros, 33 D3As, and 18 B5Ns. So that's 33 dive bombers, Vals, and 18 B5N Kates torpedo bombers were launched from the Japanese carriers. That's all they could get off. That's an interesting scenario to think about again. If you consider the sheer numbers of aircraft which Japanese carriers are associated with being able to carry, what are they actually able to launch? Yorktown manages to launch her aircraft 7 minutes before Lexington does. And these aircraft were 9 Wildcats, 15 Dauntlesses, and 12 Devastators. So that's 9 fighters, 15 Dauntless dive bombers, and 12 Devastator torpedo bombers. Yorktown's dive bombers managed to find Shokaku this time. Lexington's aircraft then backed them up, but none of the torpedo bombers from either carrier hit anything, and the Japanese cap on the combat air patrol on the 8th was far more successful than it had been on the 7th. On the 7th, it had started off with being a single Zero and 2 Claudes airborne. Again, point I've tried to make in a video about the Claudes in the Key Aircraft series. They are often there doing the fighting role. We hear about Zeros, and there is the wonderful thing of that in that fight. There is 1 Zero airborne, and there are 2 Claudes. And yet, still, the person who's shot down by the initial fighters claims he was shot down by a Zero. Now, that's not impossible. It could have been that the Zero is the one. But there is a probability against you that if, you're the aircraft which happens to be focused in on by the only Zero in the sky and you're the only one that gets shot down. Yeah, it's possible. In return, though, the Japanese strike aircraft, well, they are spotted, the American carriers, around 11:05 hours. And whilst the Kates go in the Val's circle to approach the carriers from upwind. The US fighters did their best to shoot down the torpedo bombers before they could drop their torpedoes. But 10 of those torpedo bombers survived long enough to hit Lexington twice. Four more of the B5Ns are shot down by AA fire after dropping their torpedoes. One of the correspondents aboard Lexington actually felt that there were 5 hits on the port side between 11:18 and 11:22. I don't think so. I think he mistook some of the explosions caused by the torpedo hits, the 2 torpedo hits, for being more hits. It just seems more likely than 5 torpedoes hitting and only 3 being duds. Especially with the luck Lexington was having that day. And Japanese torpedoes, by this point in the war, weren't that bad. If they actually run true and hit you, then you have a boom, more often than not. If they don't hit you, i.e. they go too deep, then you don't have a boom, but then they wouldn't hit you. So that's their main issue, is sort of going deep or going off in random directions. If they actually run towards you and hit you, they usually work at this point. And the torpedoes, let's be honest, where they hit caused trouble. The first torpedo hit at the bow, jammed the elevators in the up position, and started leaks in the port aviation fuel storage. The second torpedo hit opposite the bridge, rupturing the primary water main, and starting flooding in the Freeport fire rooms. That's not good. Boilers have to be shut down, and this reduces her top speed, and it gives her a list to port, and then at this point, she's then attacked by dive bombers. And she's hit by 2 bombs, one of which detonated in the port forward 5-inch ready ammunition locker, which killed the entire crew and started fires. And as I said many times, there are two ways to kill a ship. Two ways only. Start a fire that can be put out by the crew and let water in such a way that they can't stop it coming in. That's how you kill a ship. Fire or water. Everything else is just letting in air. Doesn't kill a ship, sink a ship. It might be a mission kill, but it's not a warship kill. So you've got fires and you've got water coming in. You've got the combination. Remaining bombs that are dropped by the attacking dive bombers who've all focused in on Lexington, well, they detonate close alongside and their fragments pierce the hull and flood 2 further compartments. Great. Just what she needed. Also shows the joy that is the battlecruiser hull that she was built with originally. At this point, they are doing their best to counterflood, they are doing their best to recover damaged aircraft, to reorganize themselves. And at 12:47 there is an explosion triggered by sparks that ignite the gasoline vapors from the port aviation fuel tanks. This is the absolute worst scenario. You've got an explosion, you've got fire, you've got her own systems going up. The main damage control station is knocked out by this explosion, and 25 more crewmen are killed by this explosion. They've already lost a lot of them. It didn't interfere with flight deck operations, but it did lead to the refueling system being shut down. And so the fuel dauntlesses were launched, and the 6 Wildcats that were low on fuel landed on board. At 14:42 hours, there's another explosion. Aviation fuel is a notoriously toxic mixture, and it doesn't take much to set it off, and the American carrier, the Lexington, was full of it by this point in terms of fumes. And this started fires in the hangar and below the forward elevator. Blowing the actual forward elevator 12 inches above the flight deck. It was up there. Then, third major explosion at 15:25 hours. Knocked out water pressure in the hangar. Forced evacuation of machinery spaces. And the fire by this point is raging so bad that it eventually forces the evacuation of all compartments below the waterline at 1600 hours. Lexington drifts to a halt. They start to evacuate her, and she's ordered to abandon ship by her captain at 1707 hours. There are more large explosions at 1800 hours that blew the aft elevator apart and threw aircraft in the air. The captain waited until 1830 hours to try and ensure all the crew were off his ship, and then left himself. 2,770 officers and men were rescued by the rest of the task force. Now that's an important number to think about, because her entire crew are, in 1941, some in the region of 2,791. That's not including any staff, etc., and personnel aboard her. So, yeah. They did well. They did well, and she stood up well. 216 crew were killed. They reckon. And she went to battle bottom with 42 of her airplanes of her air group aboard her. It's in good condition, though, apparently underwater. You can go and find that there are 7 Devastators, 3 Dauntlesses, and a single Wildcat, all in a good state of preservation at various points. Someday they might actually recover some of them. Saratoga's wartime career was longer. She lasted throughout the war. And boy, did she fight throughout the war. At one point, she is the sole US carrier operating. And she's partnered with the USS Robin, aka HMS Victorious. She takes part in Guadalcanal. She takes part in the Eastern Solomons. She is there throughout the war. And eventually, Saratoga, takes part in Operation Magic Carpet before being assigned to Operation Crossroads. I'm not sure which I find more annoying. The fact that the Royal Navy scrapped HMS Nubian and HMS Eskimo, the Tribal class destroyers, post-World War II, let alone HMS Warspite, and they weren't preserved for the history. Or that the Americans nuked Saratoga, which served them throughout World War II. I mean, the sheer level of vandalism that goes on in the late 1940s, early 1950s, has to be seen to be believed. There is absolutely no question, it seems, in many of these people's minds who make decisions about this stuff might want to be preserved for future generations. That this ship has represented all who've gone before her, that she is the last remaining first generation of aircraft carriers of the US Navy. It's Langley, Lexington, and Saratoga. They're what provide the basis for the US Naval Aviation's development, and yeah, we're gonna bomb her. We're going to bomb her with a nuclear bomb, a weapon. Admittedly, if you want to go and see her, well, HMS Hermes, her and Noritski are one of 3 scuba diving destinations. Although I'm not sure I would personally want to dive on a ship which has been through nuclear bomb tests. But there are people who do, and maybe, once I'm older, I'll want to do that. But I'm going to be doing a video about the work of Robin and USS Robin and USS Saratoga together later in the year. So that's why I'm sort of skipping over some of Saratoga's service. And of course, that video on the raids covered quite a lot of her career. She was a very useful vessel. She was a very critical vessel. Both her and Lexington were. They stood up to a lot of punishment. Let's be honest, Lexington gets taken down more by her own internals than by external action. Yes, the external action caused the damage to her internals, but if someone had just flooded the aviation fuel tanks, which I know for operations is absolutely terrible, but there are, in some fuel management systems, the ability to dump the fuel or to actually flood the fuel and vent the hangar deck. And honestly, I'm not sure. Could you do that on the Lexington ones? They had the earlier American fuel management system. The British fuel management system automatically drains back down to the tanks below deck and has all sorts of systems around them to stop them going up because of the British actually losing seaplane carriers, the Ben Mashri, in World War One due to fire, and the British living with that. Most of the Royal Navy's fleet of World War Two is the Royal Navy exercising its demons from World War One. I mean, why do Royal Navy cruisers all carry Aztec and Aztec. It's not because the Royal Navy wants to do anti-submarine warfare with their cruisers. They have that capability with the systems, but they don't want to do that with them. No, it's because they lost 3 cruisers in World War One to a torpedo attack in one day, literally next to each other, and the British don't never want to go through that again. They have the world's most advanced fuel management system of any nation for any carriers in the World War Two, and it causes some real fun with the Americans, because at the first point, the Americans, when they're going with the escort carriers, they're going, why are you ripping the carrier apart and replacing it? We don't trust your fuel management system. Why? We looked at the schematics. It doesn't meet our standards. The Americans are going, oh, they don't. And then the Americans look at the British fuel management system and go, are you sure this is not overkill? Then after some battles in the Pacific, we'd like the plan and designs and full metrics for your fuel management system. We would like to see where we could learn from it to improve our own. We think you might. We do feel you might have gone a little bit over the top, but we understand it's 20 years of paranoia and overthinking that has produced something which is uniquely, disturbingly survivable as a fuel management system, and that you're going to be the only navy in World War II who doesn't have a carrier which descends into flames thanks to its own aviation fuel. That is due to a level of paranoia. The Lexington class don't have that level of system. They have a fairly decent system. They actually have a better system than I think Ranger had. Because the Americans at certain points, especially the Bureau of Aeronautics, because they're so obsessed with the concept of launching aircraft as rapidly as possible and turning aircraft around as rapidly as possible, are prepared to accept a lot of what you and I might call compromises, what they call features. You and I might go, that's a high risk system for if there's any fire issues. Oh, there won't be any fire issues. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. There's no risk. So, Saratoga, she even serves in death because she shows how carriers can react to being nuked. And in that, she is critical, because if we consider the aircraft carriers involved, there's the USS Independence, and there's the USS Saratoga, and those are the 2 carriers. And the Independence, well, she's a small light aircraft carrier. Saratoga is a fleet aircraft carrier. During Naval, she is 265 yards away, roughly 2 kilometers away from the blast. During Baker, she's 450 yards or 410 meters away from the blast, and the only aircraft carrier involved in Baker. She does a good job. She didn't deserve the way she went. So, their conception starts out as being battlecruiser replacements, or battlecruiser stand-ins in some ways. And they slowly evolve into, let's say one of war games first, fleet problems and exercises, into I would argue, the test bed of the modern aircraft carrier in their role and duties. You see, the US has the freedom to do that in some regards, because they've got the maneuverability and the focus on the Pacific, which allows them to pursue certain things when it comes to their carriers. Plus, they're 37,000 tons in standard. Okay? There are some inefficiencies in that hull. But the US have also managed to include more protection in that hull than they would in some other ships. They've managed to include more aircraft than you can other ships. The compromise on 37,000 tons of conversion versus 20-something thousand tons of conversion, etc., that the British try and pursue, or the various numbers the British trying to pursue to get enough aircraft out of the treaty tonnage limitations, enough aircraft carriers out of treaty tonnage limitations, are different. And this is why, in my mind, Saratoga and Lexington are, whilst they're not super carriers, they're not. They don't. The phraseology doesn't exist at the time, and it's not their role. They are certainly the true testbeds and examples of what modern carriers would become. In the diplomacy missions and the presence missions, they have a capability. They don't get used as much as the British carriers do. You can do a whole discussion, a whole video on the diplomatic missions which Hermes and even Argus get sent on, let alone HMS Eagle, especially in their China station deployments. And in contrast, the American carriers, they're doing the fleet problems and they're being kept to the American coast and the Caribbean and popping to Hawaii. That's it. They're very much part of the warfighting force, and that's what they're going to focus on. They do presence in a limited way, I suppose. But in terms of the wartime role of a carrier, raiding, strategic versatility, firepower, working as a core component for a fleet force, rather than just being individual ships, yeah, Lexington and Saratoga do that. Sometimes they pair up, sometimes they're doing it solo, sometimes they're against each other, sometimes they're alongside each other. And those exercises, they're the learning experience of the US Navy. They're where they start to formulate what they want. Good example of this is Ranger versus the Yorktown class. Ranger is built according to the theories of the Bureau of Aeronautics. And it's terrible. It is. They originally considered these to be white elephants. After operating these Yorktowns are built to the Lexington model. They are better versions by a long way. They are far more efficient designs, but they are versions of the Lexingtons. That's what they're building from. And ultimately you will have the Midways, which will also come from the Lexingtons and the Yorktowns. And the Midways are the true expression of what the US Navy would have liked to have as a carrier in this period. And they are a product of the wargaming, of the ideas which led to the USS Ranger, but also the experience and of the concepts which created the Lexingtons. These carriers were about information warfare. They were about reconnaissance, raiding, and counter-reconnaissance. And they did that very, very well. Whether in exercise or war. And whilst Lexington went down doing her service, in a way not unbecoming, a lady of her standing, Saratoga, whilst she proudly served even to the end in being blown up by her own people in testing, I can't help but feel deserved a better ending. Anyway. That's the end of today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I don't think I am an hour and 20 minutes. I think I'm about an hour and 10 minutes, probably. Good lord. Now, the question I'm going to put with Lexington and Saratoga is this. You need to imagine that you are a naval architect. That they have completed that about, let's see, the US Navy is told that it can complete a third Lexington class as an aircraft carrier. So it's probably going to be Constellation or Constitution. Those seem to be the two furthest along. And they've held on to them to decide. And the question is decided that they'll be held, the third one's held on until 1925, when Lexington and Saratoga are launched. And it's then you get to work on it, 1925 onwards. Let's say the treaty system has been adjusted so you have the tonnage space and you have the option for a third, okay? That's how we'll swim it. So you don't have to worry about the existing tonnage restrictions. You'll still be able to get the other aircraft. And your Lexington Saratoga, you're allowed a third one. The system allows a third one. But the US Navy, because it's the US Navy, and because the Bureau of Aeronautics and the Bureau of Ships are being a bit weird, decided that what we'll do is we're going to complete 2, and we're going to wait till we're further along before we start working on. What lessons, what ideas would you take from Lexington Saratoga? Bearing in mind that they took roughly 2 years from launching to commissioning, and they'd been a little over 4 years, both of them, in terms of going from laying down to launching. Especially when you consider that, well, yeah, they're laid down as they were historically. The decision taken in 1920 is basically to hold it for 2 years. 2-3 years. You're going to hold the design for the ship, the hull, sitting on the side for maybe more than 2 years. You build it. What changes do you make? You are this third one, and it's being held for 2 years. So you're starting, let's say, 1920... I'd love to say 1923, but I'm going to go, actually, no, hold it for roughly 4 years. It's going to be 1925. You're starting when Saratoga is launched in April 1925. You're starting, whether it's Constellation or Constitution, you're starting on it either at Newport News, in the case of Constellation, or Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. So, I'm going to say it's probably Philadelphia Navy Shipyard. Let's be honest, you can hold a hull far easier in a Navy shipyard than you can in a private shipyard. So, probably it's Constitution. I doubt it'll be United States. So, it's CC5, Constitution, has been held until 1925. And you're able to use lessons learned. What do you do? How do you change things? So, they've just launched Lexington Saratoga. They still haven't finished them. But what do you go for? What are you going to try and avoid? Because they've pretty much done most of their construction. They've pretty much worked out everything that's going into them. All their engines, all their systems, hull design. You can see the hull design they've gone with already. The issues of where they put in lifts, etc. So what do you do? How do you do it? You've got a third Lexington class. You are starting... When Saratoga is launched, you are finally given the go-ahead. Carry out the conversion, launch it as soon as possible, commission it as soon as possible. Your target date for service entry is no later than 1929. So, despite the fact that they go for 6 years from laying down to launching, laying down to commissioning. In fact, in the case of Lexington, she goes from literally the 8th of January 1921 to the 14th of December 1927. Let's be honest, that's definitely 6+ years. You have less time. You have to get this ship in service and commissioned by some point in 1929. And your starting date is April 1925. Good luck. What do you do? How do you approach things? What are different? Well, coming up next week, we have 845 Squadron Royal Navy. Ooh, that's going to be a fun one. That is going to be a fun one. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, please do consider liking, sharing, and subscribing so I can help spread the naval history message. And thank you to everyone who does super chats, super thanks, is a patron or a member, or does the Ko-fis. They really do help. They really do help. The Ko-fi buys my own brew supply, which keeps me caffeine. And Patreon and all the super chats and super thanks go towards books, which are an expensive addiction. If you want to stop your children doing things which are bad for them, get them into books. I've heard also good things about horses, but I've also heard that horses can lead to family bankruptcy, so books are probably better. They're going to be expensive enough to keep them busy, but cheap enough they won't bankrupt the family. Books. Saving everyone. Especially history books. Highly recommend history books. Maybe about destroyers. They're quite good. I hear there's a very good one on Troubles, Battles, and Darings.